My wife disappeared on a so-called spiritual retreat, but it was all a cover. She was with her secret lover, quietly draining my inheritance behind my back. What she didn't know was that I'd already set a trap, and by the time she returned, it was too late to undo what I'd put in motion. Today's story isn't just about love gone wrong. It's about a husband who saw the knife before it touched his back and decided to outplay the betrayal. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever wanted to watch quiet revenge unfold step by step, then stay with me. Because she thought she could steal everything. But she never saw what he had already done. For most people looking in, Lena and I were the picture of a perfect marriage, successful, smiling, stable. We had the house with the manicured lawn, the lake house we visited every summer, and even the Sunday brunches that made it look like we had it all figured out. But if you stared a little longer, past the curated social media posts and the dinner party laughter, you'd start to feel it, something hollow sitting in the middle of it all. I started noticing it after Dad passed. That's when everything shifted, quietly, like a breeze changing direction before a storm. My father was the kind of man who built his fortune quietly and taught me to do the same. He owned 3 dry docks, a modest chain of hardware stores, and parcels of land across Ohio. When he passed, everything was placed in a trust under my name. It wasn't flashy money, but it was stable, something to protect and grow. Lena cried at the funeral, hugging my mother and whispering prayers, but her eyes never truly met mine that day. I should have seen it then. Grief wasn't the only thing that changed her. It was opportunity. In the weeks after the funeral, I was drowning in logistics, lawyers, estate filings, meetings with our financial advisor. Lena said all the right things. She brought me coffee in the morning, cooked more than she had in years, and even canceled a few of her yoga classes just to be with me. But her phone buzzed more than usual. Her laptop never left her side. At night, she started sleeping facing away from me. I told myself it was stress. Mourning makes people behave differently. But something in my gut whispered otherwise. Then came the first red flag, an alert from one of the trust's accounts. A $40,000 investment marked under a green energy startup I'd never heard of. The account was in both our names, but Lena had never touched it before. When I asked her, she smiled and brushed it off, saying, "It's a friend's project. I thought we could get in early. You always said timing matters." I nodded, but that feeling in my gut grew teeth. She was testing the waters, seeing how closely I monitored the money, and how much she could move without consequence. That week, I went through our joint account history for the past 3 months. Patterns emerged. Expensive wine deliveries to addresses that weren't ours, hotel stays under aliases, spa charges in cities she never told me she visited, all while claiming to be doing inner work or helping her sister through a breakup. I didn't confront her. Not yet. My father didn't raise a man who exploded. He raised a man who calculated. I made copies of every record, downloaded every receipt, and stored them on a private cloud she didn't know existed. Then came her announcement. Lena was going on a 3-week spiritual retreat in Italy with a group of like-minded women to heal and grow. She even printed out a brochure, filled with fake names and vague testimonials. I didn't show my suspicion. I kissed her goodbye at the airport, carried her bag, and smiled like the fool she thought I was. But the moment she walked past security, I pulled out my phone and sent a text to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Donnie Sharp, a former military buddy turned private investigator. I needed answers. Fast. Donnie didn't ask many questions. I wired him the retainer and gave him Lena's itinerary. "It's probably not even real," I told him. "I just want to know who's really holding her hand in Florence." He chuckled and replied, "Give me 72 hours. That was the moment I stopped being the grieving husband and became something else, something colder. I didn't cry when I found out. I didn't panic. I just waited, sharpening the edge of my silence like a blade. Because Lena thought she was playing a long game with someone still distracted by pain. But I was already watching. 3 days later, Donnie sent the first email. Photos of Lena and a tall man walking hand in hand through the cobbled streets of Florence, sipping espresso, and kissing on a balcony that was definitely not part of any women's retreat. The man was young, stylish, and clearly familiar. I zoomed in and nearly laughed out loud. He was one of the so-called investors from the fake green startup. The pieces were falling into place fast. My inheritance was being used to finance her affair. But she didn't know that I was already building something she wouldn't see coming. When she texted me that night, "Thinking of you," I replied, "Me too. Can't wait to hear all about your retreat." She had no idea what I had planned. The moment I opened Donnie's second email, I knew my suspicion had only scratched the surface. This wasn't just a simple affair, it was a coordinated betrayal, layered with deception and greed. The photos were sharper this time. Lena wore a silk dress I had bought her on our anniversary, laughing at a rooftop restaurant, the same one she once claimed was too touristy when I suggested it on our last trip. Her companion, now confirmed as Marco Vellini, wasn't just any con artist. He had a long trail of bankrupt startups across Europe, all connected to suspicious wire transfers and sudden disappearances. Donnie attached a PDF. Inside were screenshots of Lena's email threads with Marco. She had sent confidential documents, some of them detailing portions of my father's estate and bank access codes. The subject lines alone made my stomach turn. Can we move another 50K? He suspects nothing. Soon we won't need to hide. I stared at the screen, cold settling into my chest like stone. This wasn't about love, not even lust. It was a heist. My wife had become a thief, and the person she was stealing from was the man who trusted her with everything. Still, I didn't act. Not yet. I needed her to believe I was still blind. I replied to her text like a doting husband. How's the retreat? Send me photos of the view. She replied with random images from the internet. A monastery, a garden, a group of women meditating. I cross-referenced each one. None of them were taken during her trip. Her lies were sloppy, and she thought I was dumb enough not to notice. That's what made it easier to smile when I visited my lawyer the next morning and rewrote the terms of our financial protection clause. I had originally signed over partial access to Lena after our 5th wedding anniversary, back when I believed in things like forever. But my father, cautious as ever, made sure my shares in his company and the estate could be moved into a private trust under certain conditions. One of them was betrayal. And thanks to Donnie's surveillance, I now had hard evidence. My attorney, Ms. Carter, was brutal in the best way. We can freeze the remaining liquid assets today, she said, scanning the files. As for the rest, how badly do you want to play this out? I didn't hesitate. Let's go all the way. Within 48 hours, Lena's access to the joint accounts was suspended, but I made sure it wouldn't trigger alarms too quickly. The credit cards still worked, for now, but anything large enough to draw attention was already under my control. I moved the inheritance into a trust where she had zero reach. The green startup? Fake. I pulled the plug on it by tracing it back to one of Marco's holding companies and filing an anonymous fraud report through a contact I had at Interpol. If she thought she could play investor with my money, I wanted her to see what happens when the game turns real. To make it sweeter, I left a few breadcrumbs. Small things. A subtle change to the online banking login page. A document on her laptop that mysteriously disappeared and reappeared days later, slightly edited. I wanted her paranoid, wondering if she had made a mistake or just imagined it. Marco, on the other hand, would soon feel the real heat. His accounts were flagged. His company websites redirected to blank pages. The moment he tried to withdraw another cent, he'd get a surprise. But my favorite move came a day before Lena was supposed to return. I mailed myself a letter, handwritten, postmarked from Italy, with a fake return address. Inside were love notes written by Lena to Marco, some of them disturbingly graphic, others boasting about how stupid I was. I made sure she'd see the envelope when she came home. I wanted her to wonder if someone had slipped up, if maybe Marco's ego had gotten the better of him. Or worse, if I knew. Nothing tears apart a scam like doubt between partners. The night before her flight, I sat alone in the living room, sipping the whiskey my father used to save for holidays. It burned, but it steadied me. I stared at the fire and thought about the day I married her. The look in her eyes, the vows, the promises. Had they meant anything? Or was she always waiting for a moment like this? Maybe I'd never know, but I was done being the fool. From now on, I was the one behind the curtain, pulling strings. The next morning, I cleaned the house, made her favorite coffee, and even prepared dinner. She texted that her flight had landed and she'd be home in an hour. I smiled and texted back, "Can't wait to hear all about your healing journey." That was the last lie I told her. From that moment on, everything would be the truth. The kind that slaps harder than betrayal and cuts deeper than silence. She walked in like a queen returning from battle, sunglasses on, suitcase in hand, that fake glow from a European trip clinging to her like cheap perfume. "Honey, I missed you," she said, wrapping her arms around me as if the last 3 weeks hadn't happened. I hugged her back, masking the fire boiling beneath my ribs. She had no idea what I'd uncovered. To her, I was still the grieving husband too naive to suspect the retreat was anything but sacred. But behind my nods and warm dinner, I was already 10 moves ahead and closing in. Dinner that night was strangely normal. I asked gentle questions. How was the weather? Did the other women open up? Any spiritual breakthroughs? She answered with a rehearsed serenity that almost made me laugh. We meditated for hours. I'm so much lighter now. I nodded and refilled her glass. Not once did she flinch or stutter, which confirmed one thing. She believed her lies were airtight. She thought Marco had covered his tracks. She thought I was still blind. That's when I knew the trap was working. She couldn't see the missing walls of her little house of cards. Later that night, while she unpacked, I excused myself and headed to the study. I reopened the encrypted drive Donnie had uploaded. There it was, bank statements showing her siphoning tens of thousands into a shell company in Luxembourg. Photos of her and Marco in Milan, Rome, and even Prague. Passwords she used to move money around. Conversations where she mocked my trust. I reviewed each document carefully, organizing everything into a folder labeled Lena, Evidence, and sent a copy to my lawyer. The second folder, Marco, Wire Fraud Risk, I forwarded to Donnie, who had already contacted a federal agency anonymously. The next morning, I made my first move. I visited the bank and closed every joint account we held. I transferred all my personal savings into the trust and instructed the trustee that no external access, especially from Lena, should be granted without a direct, notarized order from me. The banker, Mr. Simmons, looked confused. Is everything okay at home? He asked gently. I smiled. Just organizing things after Dad's passing. He nodded, none the wiser, and handed me a list of newly secured account numbers. I left that bank with financial air superiority. Lena had no idea she was already bankrupt in my eyes. My second move was to ensure I couldn't be touched. I called our home security provider and had all the cameras updated, new backups created, and every login changed. I even placed one small camera in the study hidden behind a bookend, just in case she decided to go snooping for papers or emails. That same afternoon, I met with Ms. Carter again. She handed me 2 documents, divorce papers and a fraud complaint drafted but not yet filed. You want to hit her with both? She asked. I shook my head. No, not yet. Let's give her time to lie one more time. And lie she did. 3 days later, she casually mentioned needing to access some of the inheritance for a yoga retreat she wanted to co-sponsor. It's a business investment, she smiled. Just $30,000 for now. I know you trust me. I nearly choked on my coffee. Instead, I smiled. Of course I trust you. Let me look into the paperwork and get back to you. That night, I added her request to the evidence folder. The woman had no shame. Even after returning from her affair, even after stealing from me, she still thought she could ask for more. It was stunning and pathetic. But I wasn't finished. I reached out to one of Marco's old investors, whose contact Donnie had found buried in an old LinkedIn thread. The man, David Cross, was a wreck. Marco had conned him out of nearly $100,000 under a similar green startup lie. When I told him what Lena had done and showed him proof, he agreed to sign an affidavit and provide testimony if needed. Donnie began compiling a timeline, Marco's pattern, Lena's involvement, and the financial trail from my father's inheritance right into their hands. With that, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Then came the fourth move, one Lena never saw coming. I pretended to plan a weekend getaway for the two of us. I told her I booked a beach house in Cape Cod to help us reconnect. She lit up. That sounds perfect, she said, hugging me like a snake wrapping itself around prey. I told her to pack light, that I'd handle everything. That night, while she packed, I inserted one final file into the folder labeled Truth. It was a video clip, her and Marco kissing on the balcony in Florence. I placed the entire folder on a USB drive and dropped it into the safe behind my office painting. She wouldn't find it, not yet, but she would soon, and when she did, it would be on my terms. I had timed it perfectly. Everything was set in motion like pieces on a chessboard, each move calculated, each trap waiting. By the time Lena stepped into that beach house on Cape Cod, the illusion of safety wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She laughed as we walked in, commenting on the view, the soft breeze, the scent of salt water in the air. I let her soak in the calm. She thought we were healing. She believed I was still hers. That illusion was the final gift I would ever give her. Dinner was soft-lit and slow. I made her favorite, grilled salmon with lemon butter, roasted potatoes, and wine she once claimed reminded her of Paris. She smiled between sips, her eyes searching for signs of trust, trying to measure whether I still believed her. I gave her nothing but warmth. Every nod, every toast, every touch of my hand was theater. I needed her relaxed. I needed her sure she'd gotten away with everything. Because the next day, I planned to tear the curtain off her fantasy and show her just how exposed she truly was. The next morning, I woke up before her. I brewed coffee and stood by the window, watching the tide crawl in. The flash drive sat in my pocket. After she woke, I told her I had something to show her, something important. She raised an eyebrow, but followed me to the small living room. The house came with a flat screen and a laptop. I inserted the USB into the port, turned to her, and said, "Let's take a walk down memory lane." She looked confused at first, then the screen lit up with the first photo. It was her and Marco at the cafe in Florence. She blinked. Once. Twice. The next image, her on the balcony, kissing him. Then another, her emails to him. Another, screenshots of the $40,000 transfer. And then came the video. Her voice, recorded through Donnie's tech, saying, "He's so stupid. He thinks I'm on a retreat. This inheritance is basically ours." The room was silent except for her own voice echoing off the walls. Lena didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just went pale, like the blood had drained out of her soul. I don't know what that is," she stammered. "That's not, someone must have faked." "No one faked anything," I said, voice calm, steady. "I've known since the day you left, and I gave you every chance to come clean. I didn't steal. I was just helping Marco. He said it was a short-term investment." Stop. I raised my hand. "You weren't helping him. You were leaving with him. I have the plane tickets you never used. You were going to disappear once you had enough. He played you, just like you tried to play me." She stood, breath shallow, reaching for her bag. "I need air." "Sit," I said. Something in my voice froze her. I reached into my coat and pulled out the second folder, the one Ms. Carter had prepared. Divorce papers, fraud documentation, affidavits, signed testimonies. Everything perfectly ordered. I placed them on the coffee table like a hand of royal flush cards. "You won't be getting another cent from me. The accounts are locked. The inheritance has been moved. Marco's operations have been reported. Your name is tied to it all. This," I tapped the papers, "is the only chance you have to walk away quietly." Tears finally came, but not the kind that come from guilt or love. No, these were the tears of someone who realized the game was over. The kind of tears that burn when the mask you wore for years finally melts, and there's nothing underneath but loss. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. "Yes, you did," I replied. "You just didn't think I'd catch you." We didn't speak for the rest of the day. She packed that night, silent and slow. The next morning, I watched her drive away from the beach house, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. I didn't wave. I just stood there as the dust settled around my feet. When I returned from the beach house, the silence in our home felt different, cleaner, lighter. Her perfume no longer lingered in the hallway, and the closet doors hung open with empty hangers like a room that had finally exhaled. I didn't miss her. I missed who I thought she was. There's a difference. But what came next wasn't about mourning. It was about closure. Lena thought she'd slipped away, licking her wounds and ready to negotiate. What she didn't know was that I had saved my cruelest mercy for last, and it would be written in ink and sealed in court. I waited a full week before filing. I wanted the anticipation to build. I wanted her to sit in that cheap downtown apartment she'd rented and wonder why I hadn't retaliated yet. I knew she'd expect a dramatic outburst, maybe even a desperate apology session. She didn't know me anymore, if she ever did. While she tried reaching out through vague texts, "Can we talk? Let's not let lawyers ruin us," I remained silent, cold, untouched. My final move wasn't personal. It was surgical, and the courtroom was my operating table. The day I filed for divorce and fraud, I did it with precision. Miss Carter smiled as we signed the last of the papers. "She won't know what hit her," she said, sliding the documents into the envelope. "We didn't just sue for the divorce. We added claims of marital theft, intentional misrepresentation, and breach of fiduciary duty. And thanks to the evidence Donnie gathered and the statements from Marco's other victims, we had enough to link her to a criminal conspiracy. Her green startup investments, They now looked like laundering efforts. I wasn't just ending the marriage. I was dragging her reputation behind it. 2 days later, Lena was served while walking into a Pilates studio. The process server told me she went ghost white and dropped her smoothie. She tried calling me immediately after, but I ignored it. Instead, I posted a short public update on my social media. No names, no drama, just a quiet announcement. After a great deal of reflection, I've made the decision to move forward in life alone. Betrayal doesn't define us. How we respond to it does. The support poured in. Friends, family, even distant cousins. But the best part? Marco saw the post too. I know because that same night, I received an anonymous message. You set her up, didn't you? It was from a burner account. But Donnie traced it back to a server Marco had used before. I didn't reply. Instead, I let the consequences answer for me. Within a week, Marco's accounts were flagged in 3 countries. Lena's name was added to an ongoing investigation. She was summoned to provide testimony, and once they saw the evidence I had, it turned into an inquiry of her own. Her lawyer called me, asking to settle quietly. She's willing to walk away with nothing, he pleaded. Just don't press charges. But that was never the deal. I didn't just want her to lose. I wanted her to realize what losing really meant. So I counteroffered, no settlement, full legal exposure. I demanded the return of every dollar she funneled into that startup and refused to sign anything until she issued a notarized apology and dropped all marital claims. The silence that followed was delicious. I could feel her choking on the realization. For the first time, Lena had no cards left to play. She wasn't the clever wife. She wasn't the glowing retreat goer. She was just a liar with no money, no allies, and no exit strategy. By the end of the month, Lena signed everything. The divorce was finalized with full asset protection in my favor. I retained the house, the trust, and the land. She walked away with nothing but a tarnished name and a black mark on her record. Marco vanished shortly after. Rumor had it he fled to South America. The investigation would catch up to him eventually. It always does. But I was done chasing ghosts. I didn't need revenge in the traditional sense. I had something better: clarity. I stood outside the courthouse that day, watching her leave through the side exit, head down, sunglasses on. She didn't look at me. Maybe she couldn't. Or maybe she knew that if she did, she'd see it, how calm I was. How unaffected. That, in itself, was the most painful blow. I hadn't just survived her betrayal. I had thrived in its wake. It's strange how quiet life becomes once the noise dies down. No more fake retreats. No more business investments. No more hushed phone calls from another room or late-night trips that didn't add up. Just silence. Honest, healing silence. I didn't move out of the house after everything was over. I stayed. People asked me why. Why not start over somewhere else? But this home wasn't the crime scene. It was the evidence that I had endured. It was mine before her, and it would still be mine long after the ghost of her betrayal faded from the walls. I replaced the furniture, tore out the closet, painted over the bedroom walls we once argued in. I removed everything that felt like her. The china she insisted we use on holidays, gone. The fake art she said gave the house soul, donated. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Each box I packed, each drawer I emptied, it wasn't about erasing her. It was about restoring myself. I had spent years bending to make her happy, adjusting my boundaries, compromising for peace. But I finally saw the truth. Peace doesn't come from giving in. It comes from standing firm and letting go. Word got around town eventually. People asked quiet questions, offered awkward sympathy. I didn't explain much. Just said we grew apart and smiled. I didn't need them to know the details. Lena's silence told the story better than I ever could. She disappeared from our circle entirely. No more appearances at social mixers. No sudden pop-ins at community fundraisers. She faded like a rumor that no one wanted to repeat. I heard she'd tried moving in with a friend, but that didn't last long. Once the investigation started circling Marco, everyone who'd touched their scheme began to scatter. Donnie kept me informed. He still had connections in all the right places. Marco was now on a federal watch list, flagged for fraudulent international activity. He wouldn't be boarding any commercial flights without flashing red lights blinking across systems. Lena's name had been quietly added to several investigative reports. While no charges stuck, yet her financial history was stained. No reputable company would hire her in a fiduciary role again. The very world she tried to cheat her way into had slammed its doors shut. She didn't just lose the money. She lost access. She lost credibility. And most importantly, she lost control. I didn't celebrate her fall. There was no champagne, no smug smile. Just a quiet walk on a late Sunday afternoon, the breeze tugging gently at my jacket as I thought back on everything. There's a certain dignity in not gloating, a quiet power in moving on without revenge clouding your lungs. I didn't need her to beg. I didn't need her to suffer. I needed her to see what happens when you play a long game with someone who's already read the rules backwards and forwards. I hadn't just survived her scheme. I had dismantled it, step by calculated step. Some evenings, I would sit on the back porch with a drink in hand, watching the wind ripple across the pond. I thought of my father then, the man who taught me to stay patient, who used to say, never play all your cards at once. Let them think you're folding until the last round. That's what I did. Lena never realized the moment I saw through her. She never caught the shift in my tone, the tightening of my smile. She thought she was the storm, but I had already built the shelter and locked her out. A year later, I started traveling again. Places Lena had never wanted to go. Portugal, Tokyo, South Africa. I walked into each city not as a broken man, but as one rebuilt. I invested quietly in startups I actually believed in. I supported causes my father would have been proud of. And yes, I met someone eventually. Someone who didn't need a performance to feel seen. We took it slow. I told her the truth in chapters, not all at once. She never judged. She listened. That's when I knew I was healing for real this time. Looking back, I'm not angry with Lena anymore. Not even disappointed. She was exactly who she revealed herself to be. I just didn't want to believe it until she'd already drawn the blade. But I thank her now, not because of what she did, but because of what I learned. I learned how far I could stretch before breaking. I learned the strength in watching, in waiting, in planning. I learned that silence, when used wisely, is the sharpest weapon a person can wield. She tried to strip me of everything. But in doing so, she made me sharper, smarter, stronger. People still say things like, I don't know how you stayed so calm. The truth is, I wasn't calm at first. I was gutted, but I made a choice to act, not react, to move 3 steps ahead. Because when someone shows you who they are behind your back, you don't shout it from the rooftop. You build the rooftop higher, make sure the floors beneath it are steel, and then you wait until they fall through their own lies. And when they do, you won't need to say a word. The truth will echo louder than any revenge ever could. You followed me through betrayal, deception, and the quiet power of calculated revenge. This wasn't just a story of loss. It was a lesson in reclaiming control without ever raising your voice. If you found yourself holding your breath through each twist, and you want more stories that reveal what happens when the underestimated rise with purpose, then this channel was made for you. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell. Because the next story might just be the echo of something you've lived through, or something you'll never see coming.